Hello everybody, welcome to Weekly Tech. In this video, we're gonna see some interview questions based on promise, async and await in JavaScript. Promise is the key feature of JavaScript, asynchronous programming. Whether you love it or you hate it, you have to understand it. In this video, I have covered around 8 to 10 interview questions that will start from the very basic and will go up to the advanced level. So let's not waste much of the time and go to our first question. The first one, let me copy it from the slide and paste it in VS Code. So the first one is very simple. Synchronous code gets executed from top to bottom, and it gets executed in JavaScript first. So synchronized code blocks are always executed sequentially from top to bottom. When we call the promise constructor the new promise, the callback gets executed immediately. So we'll have few thumb rules to crack these questions. First, try to find a synchronous code block, all the synchronous code block in the code snippet, and that will be get executed sequentially first. So in this case, as I said, promise constructor, whenever we call or we create a promise using the promise constructor like this, the new promise, its callback get executed immediately. So in this case, if we go from top to bottom or sequentially, the first one is a start, and then there is a promise. We are creating the promise constructor callback here, so it will be executed after start, and uh, the last one will be end. So the output will be start, in promise and end. Okay, start, in promise and end. So let me grab the second interview question. This is again, we need to follow the thumb rule. This is a synchronous block, and this is a synchronous block. In the promise, the constructor callback, so this resolve is asynchronous. So this resolve will be get resolved in the dot then function. If you are not able to understand what dot then is and what dot catch will do, I have created a separate video on promise, async and await. It's a kind of crash course. The link is in the description. You can go through the link and check it out. So in this for the answer for this question will be start, and then the console.log, this one, of the promise constructor callback, and then end, and then the dot then function will get executed and the promise is getting resolved. So in the end, in resolve promise 1. So the output will be start, in promise 1, end, and in promise 1 resolve. Let's see. Start, in promise 1, end, and in promise resolve 1. Fantastic, isn't it? So let's move on. So just remember the thumb rules that we have talked till now. Synchronous code will be executed sequentially first, and then comes the asynchronous code. Let's check our next interview question, the third one. Let me copy it here and paste it back to VS Code. This console log at line number 23 is introduced, but don't get afraid. If you know the thumb rule, you will be in a better position. So let's try to find out the first the synchronous code blocks. So this is a synchronous one. Again, the callback of the promise constructor, this is a synchronous one, and after that this will be asynchronous resolve, and this will be synchronous dot then will be asynchronous, and end will be synchronous. So as per the thumb rule, the output will be start, in promise 1, in promise 3, end, and this asynchronous block will get executed. So resolve will be resolved in the dot then, and you will get in promise resolve 2 in the end. So let's see. Okay, so start, promise 1, promise 3, as I said, and in the end the promise will be resolved and you'll get in promise resolve 2. Let's move on to our fourth one. This is the fourth one. Let me copy it here and paste it in VS Code. Let me know if you need this code block. I'll provide you a gist. Okay, so in this case, this is a synchronous block, and we have a constructor, and constructor inside we have a callback, and this will be synchronous. So start, and in promise 1, and end, and dot then and in our promise, okay, so in this promise is not getting resolved. So in our previous video, or if you know, we have talked about this, that if the promise is not resolved, then the promise ultimate state will be pending. So in this case our promise 1 will be pending always, because we are not resolving it. So the output will be start, in promise 1, and end. This console log won't get printed because dot then function will get only executed if the promise is fulfilled or resolved. So by fulfilled and resolved, that means the promise is settled. Okay, so in this case we are not resolving the promise, so dot then will not get executed. And let's see the output: start, in promise 1, and end. So let's move on to our next question. Copy it from here. You can pause the video for a moment and try to debug the output first from your end, and then you can check what is the real output. Okay, so in this section we have a synchronous block here and a function, and we will come to it later when it is getting called. So, and this is a synchronous block, so obviously the output will have, the first one will be start, and then the second output will be middle. Now the function is getting called. So so this time the function will be called. So remember, the function calls are always synchronous. Okay, so this, after middle, the next synchronous call is this block, the function call. Or in the function call we are creating a constructor, promise constructor, and the promise constructor is having a callback. So as we have seen in the earlier questions, this callback is synchronous. So this console.log will be in the next sequence. So after middle, the next synchronous will be this console log, because we are calling the function. And the resolve is asynchronous, so first the synchronous block will be executed. So start, middle, then this function will be executed, and because of the execution of this function, this console log will be in the sequence, the synchronous sequence. So start, middle, in promise 1, end, and then in the end asynchronous call will be resolved. So dot then will work, and you'll get res, the success in the output. So start, middle, then in promise 1, end, and success. So success will be the last. So start, middle, in promise 1, end, and success. So let's move on to our next question. This one, let me copy and paste it in the VS Code. Okay, so in this case I have two promises, and which is getting resolved immediately. So this is a synchronous block, so obviously start will be the first one, and this is getting resolved immediately. But promise is always asynchronous. So start, end, and then promise 1 and promise 2, because promise 1 is in the micro stack first, so it will be executed. And we'll see questions on micro and macro stack in the coming section of the video. Please don't leave the video here, we have some interesting questions coming. So in this case you'll have start, end, promise 1 and promise 2. Let's see the output quickly: start, end, promise 1 and promise 2. So let's move on to our next question, that is this one. This is again a question of micro task versus macro task, set timeout versus promise, which will get resolved first. So this is a question more related to the functioning of event loop, and in the next videos I'll be covering event loop in a separate playlist. We'll deep dive into event loop and we'll understand it from the very deep. Just to answer it, promises are part of micro task queue, and set timeouts and timers are part of macro task queues. And micro task queues are more privileged and will get more priorities as compared to macro one. So I am adding another rule in our thumb rule list. The second rule is promises are part of micro task, and timers and set timeout are part of macro task. So micro tasks are always prioritized, they get more priority as compared to macro task. So promises will get more priority, and process dot next tick will get more priority as compared to set interval and set timeout. So in this case, start is the synchronous and end is the synchronous. So start and end will be part of the first and second line of the output console, and promise will be resolved immediately. So promise will get priority as compared to set timeout. So the third output will be resolved, and the last one will be from set timeout. Let's check the output. Just remember the thumb rule, because the next questions will gonna bit more tricky. So let's move on to our next question. Okay, so in this case we have a promise which is getting created by using the promise constructor, and there is a callback for the promise constructor which is getting resolved inside it, and we are using the dot then here, and we have a console log. So first try to find out, and let's follow the thumb rules. First try to find out the synchronous block. So this is our first synchronous block, so it will be executed. So we'll get the first line as in console 4, and here the promise is we are collecting the resolved cases here in dot then. So let's go back to promise and let's see what is happening inside our promise. So this one will be synchronous. Okay, I haven't seen this console log. So we are creating the promise constructor. First one will be in promise 1, and the second one will be in console 4, and then there is a timeout. Okay, so timeout is from here to here. So this console log is also here. So let me separate it out so it will be easy for you to see. Try to follow the thumb rule. Promise constructor, there is a callback. So this will be synchronous, this will be synchronous, and this will be synchronous. So the output will be in promise 1, in promise 2, and in promise 4, and then the set timeout will be executed, and in set timeout we are actually resolving it, and then after resolving it, it will come to dot then. But we have a set timeout console sitting here, so this console is before this resolve, and once it is resolved, then only the dot then will work. So this is a bit tricky, but if we follow the thumb rules, it will save us from any confusion. So till now we have followed the first thumb rule to try to find out the synchronous block. So promise 1, promise 2, and promise 4 is synchronous. So now the part of a micro task versus the macro one. So right now in the execution, is there is any micro task? Set timeout is not part of micro, is part of macro. So there is no micro task for now. Let's move on to macro. So yeah, macro is there, so it will be executed because there was no micro, because the resolve was not directly, we are not calling the resolve directly, it's in the set timeout. So if we go from top to bottom, my promise 1, promise 2, then promise 4, and then there is no micro. Is there is any macro? Yes, set timeout is here. Okay, execute it. So execute the callback. So what is there in the callback? There is a console log. Execute it. So the output will be in promise 1, in promise 2, in promise 4, timer start, then promise resolve will be pushed to the micro queue. Right now the execution is happening on this callback from this parenthesis to here. So as this is a part of micro task, this will be executed after the micro one. So in the current execution, if you come from top to bottom, there is no micro task. So here comes the micro one. So this callback will be executed from this parenthesis to this one. Okay, so it will be executed fully, and then it will move to the next phase, the event loop. Okay, then it will move to the next phase. So in this case, the timer start will get printed. Resolve. So once the resolve is called, a task will be pushed to the micro task queue, and in the next tick, or in the next loop of the event loop will pick this micro task. Okay, so this whole execution won't gonna finish in the in one loop of event loop. It will take the second loop also, because this resolve is pushing it in the micro task queue, so it will be picked in the next execution. So now comes the timer end. So this callback will be gets fully executed. So the output will be in promise 1, in promise 2, in promise 4, timer start, timer end, and then event loop will make the new loop. the second loop, and it will check whether there is anything in the micro. Yes, that got resolved from the last run, and this promise dot run will get resolved and will print success in the end. So we'll get success in the end. So in promise 1, in promise 2, in promise 4, timer start, timer end, and success. Let me know in the comment section if you have any question. Okay, let's move on to our next question. Okay, this will again, okay, from this question we'll set another thumb rule. So let's debug it. So we have a timer, we have two timers actually. This is getting completed here. So we have two timers, one is timer 1 and timer 2. So let's try to find out any synchronous block first. Is there is any synchronous block? No. So thumb rule 2, is there is any micro task? No, right? No promises, no process or no stick. So let's move on to macro 1. Is there is any macro? Yes. Set timeout is there. So we'll go from top to bottom. Set timeout, this will get executed. So the output will be timer 1, this callback. So the first one will be timer 1, and then after that a promise is getting created which is getting resolved immediately. So this will push to the micro task. Okay, this won't execute right now because right now the execution is of the callback of this macro task. Okay, so micro versus macro. So right now the macro phase is there. So this promise will be pushed to the micro task now, and this console log will get resolved in the micro task run. So right now the console will print only timer 1. Now here comes the timer 2. So the question is, will the timer 2 gets picked? The answer is no. So some friends may think that micro task and macro task are executed like this. Execute all the micro task first, execute all the macro task first, execute all the micro task again. So no, this doesn't happen. What really happened behind the scene is execute all the micro task first. So execute all the promises first, and then execute one macro task. Then execute all the newly added micro task, and then execute the next macro task. Okay, so only one macro task will be executed. So in this case we have two macro tasks, so only one get executed, and then the second one will be executed in the next run of the event loop. So for the first run there is no micro task, so it will move to the macro one, and timer will get executed, timer 1 will get executed, so the callback will be executed. You'll get timer 1 in the output. A promise will be pushed to the micro task queue. So the event loop will run again, and it will see, okay, is there is any micro task in the queue? Yes, that got pushed from the last run. So it will execute the promise, and then it will execute the next macro. This is timer 2. So we will have timer 1 in the output, and from the next run we'll have promise 1, and from the next run, I mean the second run, we'll have timer 2 in the output. So the output will be timer 1, promise 1, and timer 2. Let me explain this scenario more. So let me create more timers. Okay, just to get more understanding. So I'll create two more timers. I'll name it timer 3, just to prove you that only one timer will get picked at a time. Okay, and I'll create more promises. So this is getting finished here, right? Yeah, so I'll create more promises, and I'll do it like this, and I'll name it promise 1. So I'll do it promise 2 and promise 13. Let's make it promise 13 and promise 2. Okay, so now think for a while, what will be the output? So we have a timer, event loop will run. Okay, so we have another timer, another timer, and another timer. So 2 3 4, we have 4 timers. So it will run from top to bottom. So this will be executed, and the promises will be pushed to the micro task. Promise 1, 12, and 13 will be pushed to the micro task, and then this second timer won't get executed now. It will be executed in the next run. But in the next run you have promise 1, 12, and 13 sitting. So it will execute all of them, and then we'll move to the third timer, and then in the next run it will check for any micro task. Okay, there is no micro task, execute timer 4. So you will have timer 1, promise 1, promise 12, promise 13, then timer 2, 3, 4 in the output. So you will have timer 1, promise 1, 12, 13, and timer 2, 3, 4 in the output, my friend. Okay, I hope it is clear. So let me put another promise here to make it more interesting. Okay, let's make it like this. I'll call it 23 for timer 2, 23. Okay, and I'll put it in the timer 4 also. Okay, I'll miss one. I don't know what I'm doing right now, but we'll debug from top to bottom and we'll follow the thumb rule. So 40, I'll make it 44 just to be clear with the timer 4. Okay, so now let's come from top to bottom. Okay, what is from the top? We have a timer 1. So timer 1, so console 1. Timer 1 will be console the first output, and event loop will run, will make the next round. So in the next round we'll have promise 1, 12, and 13. So let me put the output here. I am saying that I'll have timer 1 in the output, followed by promise 1, then promise 12, then promise 13, and then the next macro queue will be executed, that is the timer. So only one at a time. So timer 2 will be executed, so it will print timer 2 in the output, then the promise will be pushed to the micro phase. Okay, now in the next run taken from the micro task queue, so 23 will be printed, pr 23, and then the next timer, the timer 3 will be printed immediately, and the next run there is no micro task, so timer 4 will be printed. So timer 3, then timer 4, and then I promise 44 because it was pushed from the last run. So we'll get promise 44 in the output. Let's check the output, what we'll get. Let's match it. We'll get timer 1, promise 1, timer promise 12, promise 13, timer 2, timer 23, timer 3, timer 4, and promise 44. Isn't it fantastic? So let me know in the comment section if you have any doubt, and let's try to answer our last question of the video. And if you have reached till now and if you have no doubts, then congratulations, my friend, your understanding is getting quite good and you may be able to answer our last question. And if you are able to, then you have built a strong knowledge on promises, async await interview questions. You will be able to answer them for sure. So this is our last question. Let's try to answer it. Okay, try to find out the first thumb rule. Try to find out synchronous block. So this is synchronous. Okay, this is resolved, getting immediately resolved, so we are not interested now. This is the timer, so we are not interested now. So this is end, so the output will be start, end. And let's move on to our next block, that is this one, promise dot resolve. Again the micro task come into picture. Do we have anything in the micro task? Yes, we have a promise. So start, end, console log, this promise one, then a set timeout. This will be pushed to the macro task. Okay, so micro task, so promise will get executed first, so start, end, and then we'll have promise 1 in the output, and this callback is also having a timer, so this will be pushed to the macro task queue. Okay, now execute the macro one. So this is pushed in the second time. Before that this was there, so this will be executed first, so you'll get timer 1 in the output in the macro task, and then a promise. Okay, so the promise will be pushed, this we have seen from the last question, it will be pushed to the micro task queue. The event loop will run, it will pick this promise, so you'll get promise 2 in the output, and then the timer 2. So you'll get start, end, promise 1, timer 1, promise 2, and timer 2 in the output. So start, end, promise 1, timer 1, promise 2, and timer 2. So this is it, folks. I hope it is clear, and let me know in the comment section if you have any doubt, suggestion, and queries. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you guys. Thanks a lot. See you in the next video.